Do you get nervous in golf?
We're rolling, so.
I don't get nervous about what my score is going to be, but I overthink all the time because I've taken some lessons. So I'm constantly thinking, okay, release your hands here, make it do this.
So you're thinking about the mechanics.
I think about the mechanics of every swing. And when it works, I'm really happy. And when it doesn't work, I'm like, dang it, what'd I mess up? What'd I forget?
Yeah, here's the deal. And, we always think about, because we're on the driving range and we're practicing, trying to refine techniques and tactics. Not so much tactics on the driving range, but we always try to take that mindset to the golf course. And once you're actually playing, it's a completely different mindset. It's hard to shift into a different kind of a gear. But
so let me just finish with something on this point. You're already recording this?
It's fine.
That's fine. Okay. Yeah. No, you can leave it in. I go to the driving range and I take a lesson, and I've got an instructor I really like, and it really works. And I get out on the course, and by the fifth hole, I can't remember, and I'm overthinking and all of this. When you fish with a guide, particularly with a guide as good as Rob Fordyce, for 30 years, we fished together 30 seasons. Every time I mess up, we talk about it. What did I do wrong? I should have put it here. I should have punched it a little bit that way. I should have played the wind. I should have played the current. It didn't roll over right because your back cast was this or that. Every casting moment was an instruction moment. And you don't have your golf instructor with you on the golf course. If he was there 24/7 with me saying you did this, do this next time, I'd be better. And I'm telling you that cast by cast, shot by shot, self-evaluation with Rob, and it's not like you did this wrong. It's like, what can I do better?
Right.
And he'll be like, well, it was over your right shoulder. Maybe we could have ticked the boat a little more this way, and we could have done that and this, and the current's like that. And so here comes the next string. Let's do this.
Now, does he ever say, oh, I should have positioned that boat a little better? Or
he doesn't have to, because it's usually always just right.
Right.
Yeah.
But, that's why the teamwork of tarpon fishing is such a special thing. When people win these tournaments, it's a team that wins. Mm-hmm. The angler kind of gets the recognition, but it's just as important to the guide. And it's not only where the guide takes you, it's what flies you choose to use and how you choose to fish the flies. And it's a total team. And in the beginning, when I was fishing with Rob, it's always kind of let's do what, he says to do. But, 30 years later, we talk about everything, and it's a community decision. Not that he doesn't know everything there is to know about it, but that's to some extent a similarity.
Does he talk you through? And we're going to go back to a whole introduction and start the podcast here in a second. But since we're on this subject, does he talk you through how to feed the fish?
Not as much as he used to, because
you know how to do it.
I tell you what, I know how to do it on the ocean better than I know how to do it in the back, because we fish a lot on the ocean.
Right.
And I know how to use the wind and the current and the rain to my advantage. Not the rain, the wind and the current and the length of your cast to my advantage to kind of cover up a miss. Whereas in the back, if the fish are really twitchy and you got to throw it 60 or 70 feet and hit it in a circle about 1 foot wide, there's not as much margin for error. Now, if you get it right, you're probably going to get a bite.
Right.
But there's not
a
as
lot
much
of current to help.
And there's not a lot of current to help sweep it. And okay, it's sweeping. I need to bring it in and let it finish sweeping, and boom, I'm in the right zone. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I think I'm pretty good at feeding them on the ocean. I may not be as good as the young guys are now, but I think back in the day, and but maybe not as good at laid up fish and quiet water in the back, the super delicate stuff.
Well, one of the things before we go, back up a little bit is you talk about the team thing. When I was a chairman one year of the Gold Cup, the original Gold Cup had only
and I remember,
the angler.
I was there,
and I told. I think it was who was it, Carla or anyway? I said we need to have the
Charlotte.
captain.
It was
Charlotte. Yeah, we need to have the angler and the guide on this trophy.
And when the trophy was redone, I don't know if you were still fishing it when we totally rebuilt the trophy. It had to be kind of reconditioned.
Yeah,
Chris Gola was chairman then.
Yeah,
we made sure that's the
captains
way.
and anglers because it is a team.
Because it is.
Anyway, let's go back to the beginning, Carlos. You come into the podcast as a great angler that we all know of, a world-class tarpon fly fisherman, but you're also a big businessman. Your father was a great businessman. You went to Harvard. You were the chairman of the board of the IGFA for a number of years. And I'd like to start back, with your dad being as big as he was in the business world, president of CocaCola. He served with President Carter in a couple of facilities or capacities. Tell me a little bit about your dad and your mom and growing up with such a high-profiled family in the business world. And what kind of pressure did you have growing up to be a businessman to maybe follow suit and take over the family business?
Well, I don't think I had any pressure. When my dad passed away a couple of years ago, my mom was making the comment that, he always did what he was expected to do. He kind of always did the right thing because his father and uncle were in the coffee business, which is how they got involved in beverages. And he just sort of followed. And so it wasn't any conscious decision. It was just kind of following the path, right? And some people choose different paths than their parents and grandparents, and some people choose the same path. And so I don't think it was any sort of conscious decision to follow the same path. I was always interested. He was a beverage guy, right? They had the coffee business and they sold the company to the Coca-Cola company, and then he became an executive at Coca-Cola, which is how I learned about tarpon fishing. I can tell you that story later. But he was he was a beverage guy. And I had summer jobs in college that worked for a securities firm. I liked the markets, and I liked buying and selling. And I liked understanding the bid-ask spread, on stocks and bonds and the amount of volume that was traded and how volume affected price movements. I just liked that stuff. And that just turned into having a job in corporate finance, and everybody I worked for went to Harvard Business School. And so they said, you ought to go. And they wrote me a recommendation, and to my surprise, I got accepted, and so I went. I came back and I did it more. I just liked that stuff. I used to read the stock pages in the Wall Street Journal in college, and my friends that wanted to be doctors read medical journals. It's just kind of what we did, right? And so you sort of followed that path. So being in finance and investing is not completely following Dad's path in the beverage industry, but it's still sort of being in the business world and not being a physician or a lawyer or a downhill ski racer, right? I mean, people choose their path.
Yeah.
Or sometimes the path just comes to them because it's something they're interested in.
Do you oversee the family business now?
I do. Yeah.
So you still do your day trading on the side or
No.
other stuff?
One thing I learned in watching trading is that all the folks with the green eye shades behind the big green screens in New York and Tokyo and London, they know more than I know. So you're never going to out-trade the traders. And so we're, even though I liked that part of it, we tend to be more long-term investors in private businesses or public entities that we just have been in forever. And because over the long haul, I don't know if you remember what Albert Einstein said. Someone asked him, is the general and special theory of relativity the most powerful forces in the universe? And he said, no, compounded interest is the most powerful force in the universe. So long-term investing, which compounds your investment, is a very powerful force. People that are traders, I have a lot of respect for them that are really good at it, that understand and can read sort of macro, things in the world and run these hedge funds. It's cool, but it's just that's not my skill set. And that is a lesson I learned from Dad, because when he was in the coffee business and he started running it for his father and his uncle in the 50s, would go to New Orleans and visit where they traded coffee. And coffee would come from Central America either to New Orleans or to the port of Houston, which is why the Duncan Coffee Company was in Houston, because the coffee landed there at the port. So you roasted it and sent it out. And he said, I went into the trading floor in New Orleans one time and looked at all of these guys that have all of this information about the markets that I didn't have, and I knew there was no way I was ever going to trade coffee. I was just going to buy it and roast it and sell it. So
pretty smart. It worked out well for him.
Yeah.
Was he a pretty driven man as far as the family, or is your mom the driving force for overseeing you and your brother, right?
Sister. I have a sister. Yeah.
So you and your sister?
She's a year and a half younger, yeah. I would say kind of both of them.
Mm-hmm.
We had a different childhood because he was a Coca-Cola guy. So I was born in Houston. When I was 7, we moved to London because he ran Coca-Cola Europe. And then when I was 10, we moved to Atlanta. When I was 14, he left Coca-Cola. We moved back to Houston. So between kindergarten and 5th grade, those 6 years, I went to 5 schools. So I was a little bit of a kind of a move around guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the family was close because you'd make friends in the 2nd grade, and 3rd grade you're gone. And so we got to Atlanta, and back then the Coca-Cola business was still is. The company makes the syrup and sells it to the bottlers or canners or whoever. Back they call them bottlers because it used to all be in glass bottles, but they would mix it with the soda water and make the drink in a bottle ready to serve rather than the fountain drink, which is like you get at any place that has a fountain. So the bottlers were all independent. Over the last few decades, the company has gained more control over the bottler network by creating these big roll-ups, and some of them they own a part of and some of them they don't, and it keeps the bottling business more closely tied to the main syrup business. And, of course, soft drinks aren't what drive it anymore. There's hundreds of labels of different waters and juices and soft drinks and, all kinds of stuff in the company now. But anyway, back then the bottlers mattered. Well, the bottler for Miami which controlled all of South Florida, was a guy named Carl Navarre. He was one of the most famous tarpon anglers there was. And because my dad grew up fishing in Galveston Bay and offshore Texas, he was a saltwater guy, and he loved fishing. And we lived in Atlanta, and so we would get invited to go down to the Keys and to fish as the guest of the Navarres, who was the bottler, right? He was a business colleague and partner of the Coca-Cola Company. He was an important bottler. He had a couple of other bottling plants around the country, so he was an important guy to know, but he was also a good friend. And so that's what first got us going down there.
Do you remember that first trip down to the Keys?
Well, wait. Give me one last question. Is it true that the Coca-Cola, the Mexican Coca-Cola, used to be mixed with cocaine?
I have no idea.
Is that myth?
I have no idea. I think it's a myth.
Because we always heard that over the years.
Well, there was no... Well, I'm relatively confident. I'm not a Coca-Cola guy, but I'm really relatively confident in saying that the formula is consistent globally and has been for 100 years.
Right.
And so I would doubt that the Mexican product would be different. A lot of people think it tastes different because some Mexican product today has cane sugar in it, whereas the U.S. has high fructose corn syrup, but the chemical formula is identical. So I think it's just people feel that it's different. But in a restaurant in Texas, you go to a Mexican food restaurant and they have Mexican bottled Coke on the menu.
Buy it.
They'll charge you more for it because they get a premium, but it's the exact same chemical formula.
Yeah. They charge you more for it here too.
Yeah. And it's the same thing.
You fucking spreading rumors already?
That's what I heard, man. I guess it goes to show you who I was hanging out with back in the 70s.
So, do you remember that first trip down with Carl Navarre to the Keys?
I do. I was 13 years old. June of 1973. I fished at Channel 2 with Cecil Keith.
Wow.
I caught on the first day a big jack that he kept because He wanted to enter it in the Met tournament. I didn't know what the Met, or some tournament. I think it was the Met. I'm not sure. And then I caught my first tarpon on a mullet on June 3rd. I remember the day exactly because my birthday is December 3rd, and it was exactly 6 months later. And it weighed 67 pounds. I wanted to mount it. Remember, you catch a fish and mount it.
Right.
So Cecil reached in his mouth and grabbed him by the gills and threw him in the boat. And he weighed 67 pounds. I think we weighed him on that concrete dock there by the fishing club. It's the only fish I've ever killed, or at least knowingly killed. We've probably let some go that died. And it hung in my room all through high school.
Wow.
I remember it like it was yesterday.
What was Cecil Keith like?
Cecil was, I didn't know him well, but he had a rough and tumble, gruff exterior. So the two guys we were with the most were Cecil and Billy Knowles. Billy was the captain of Carl's big boat and would also guide in the skiff. And Billy was more approachable. So Cecil was a little more gruff. He always had that. He was chewing on that cigar. And he would chew the end off and chew a little of the tobacco and then spit it in the water and keep chewing the next part.
Wasn't that part of the demeanor of the early tarpon guides or fishing guides in the Islamorada area? Like, stay out of my area. I want to fish over here.
Well, I was fishing on bait. I was fishing at Channel 2 with a mullet. It's not like you're in anybody's way.
But didn't that?
I realized those guys were fly guys, but I wasn't fly fishing.
Yeah, but wasn't that the same? I would say demeanor with the bait guys too. Or
not that I remember, but I was a kid, right?
Yeah.
I really don't remember if it was that way or not. I think that, and it also wasn't crowded, right? I can remember when we started like throwing plugs and maybe some flies, going to Buchanan Bank was a long way. You were way out there. They didn't go very far because there weren't as many boats and there were fish everywhere.
Well, what is that? That's like a 20-minute run?
Yeah. You blow by it on your way to the cave.
Yeah.
But I also think, too, the motors were not very reliable
dependable
back in the day, and they were afraid to get very far away from the islands.
Everybody had a radio.
Yeah.
In case you got stuck. The motors were not dependable. If you were going out that far, you made sure you had extra water and provisions and food.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And there were guys already running all the way to the Cape, and they were literally like it was an expedition to go that far.
Now they make it in 15 minutes. To the
Yeah,
Cape,
exactly.
Going 90 miles an hour.
Right. So, but I think that so just coming full circle, we went every year, meaning my dad and I, as guests of Navarre. Navarre passed away from cancer in 1985. That's Carl Sr. Obviously,
Yeah.
Carl Jr.
And Carl Sr. built the Chica Lodge, if I'm not mistaken.
He owned it. He didn't build it. He bought it. And we remember when he bought it because we used to stay in dumpy motels, and all of a sudden Carl owned Chica and we could stay there, which was great.
Nice, yes.
And because he fixed it all up. But in 1985, I quit going because our host quit inviting me. And that's when I was in grad school and I came home and I was busy and, got married and first kid was born. And it just, and I remember telling Leslie, I used to go over there. I'd watch, Flip Pallet on TV. I used to go over there and fish and do that. I used to catch those fish on fly rods. And she said, well, you ought to go back. And let's go someday. And then after Annie was born in January of 1995, she said, well, let's take a trip. And someone in our office, Betty, who worked for Dad for 40 years, got Flip Pallet on the phone and said, I talked to Flip and I said, I used to fish over there with Navarre and, Billy Knowles and Hal Chittum and Cecil Keith and Al Polofsky. I threw out a bunch of names to give myself some street cred. And I said, are you still guiding? I want to go with you. And he said, I don't guide anymore, but here's 3 names. And he gave me Rob Fordyce, John Donnell, and Rick Murphy. And I called all three. And Rob called me back in 10 minutes, and I booked some days in April of 95. So this was the 30th season. Donnell called me 10 minutes later and said, I explained this whole story I've explained to you, and John said, you're going with the only guy that's better than me. I'll see you at the ramp. And Rick Murphy never called back.
There you go.
True story.
So you said, you were catching tarpon on fly with Billy Knowles and Cecil Keith before?
No.
That was bait.
I was catching them on bait. They had a very specific deal. And then after a couple of years catching them on bait, Carl Navarre gave me a spinning rod with a big reel, biggest spinning rod I've ever seen, because I'd been catching bass on Zebcos, right? And so I learned how to throw a plug. And then the next year or two, I was throwing a plug or a jig and, catching some stuff. And sometimes we'd go bone fishing, right? We didn't always go tarpon fishing. It's what was going on. And then he gave me a white, I think it was literally a Sears Ted Williams fly rod. I think it had Ted Williams' name on it and was Sears. And he said, take this home and practice. And it had a giant gray Fluger reel on it. And I cast it in the driveway at home because he said, when next time you come, we're going to fly fish for him. And that was 75 or 76 because I know I caught my first one on fly in 77. And my guide was this new young guy named Hal Chittum who was just getting started.
Wow.
Every time I'm in the factory over there at Chittum, I remind Hal, I caught my first fish with you. Oh, yeah, I remember. He doesn't remember.
Back in 76. That's
77.
77.
Yeah. And Hal will tell you that he can take me exactly to the spot where I caught that first fish. I don't have a clue where it was, but he says he knows.
Where was it?
I don't know.
So how was that first trip with Fordyce?
It was great.
Did you know immediately this is my guy?
I just knew he was really good, and we had a really good time. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it was blowing like crazy the first day, and we went back to Flamingo, which, I've since learned when it's blowing hard and you can't catch one, you take people back there and look for reds on the back of rays and stuff, and you see whether your client can cast at all, which
whether or not they want to book you again.
Right. And so we went back there and we caught some stuff. And there was one day Leslie wanted to go. We were staying at Chica, for old time's sake, and she was going to go down to Key West and just check it out. And so the day she went to Key West, we drove up to up to the bay. No, we went in. We were fishing out front by Caesars, and I caught 2 up there that day. And I don't know if you know, there's a ditch there by the channel where permit get. And I actually had a permit rod out. And Rob says, switch rods. And I set down that rod and I picked up the tarpon rod and he said, here they come. It was like 5 or 6 fish coming down the edge. And then cast out there and caught one. And then caught another one that day. That's the first couple I've caught with Rob. And then the next day or two, we caught another couple of fish or whatever. I remember we jumped a couple in the Rob will remember this story too. I mean, it was slick calm, not a breath of air, and fish were just laying. And it was just put the pole down so careful and just drift through the and we're getting just into casting range of a big fish laying there. And Leslie stands up and opens the cooler and goes, the fish just goes, just the fish takes off. Rob's just like, let's just all stay seated when we're sneaking up on fish. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he will remember that story. Leslie will too. So, but she's become a great angler.
Yeah.
She won the ladies 2 years in a row with Billy, and she still fishes every year and
chases records too.
She chases records. She's good at it.
Well, did anything happen to you like most fly fishermen when they see a tarpon eat their fly for the first time?
I was 17. I don't remember.
Don't remember.
I probably didn't have enough. I mean, I really don't remember.
Yeah.
But that feeling of when they eat it, you still get it, right? That's why we all do it.
Yeah. It's that big tug.
Right.
Have you always been competitive? Because you're a triathlete as well. Have you always been
semi-retired triathlete?
Well, you did it for a long time, but were you always like wanting to win at what you did? Did you always have that passion for excelling?
So, I'm not sure I always wanted to win. I just like to participate. I like to do stuff, right? And, as a triathlete in my 50s, I was better than I was in my 30s. But I wasn't better because I had this desire to train harder and to win. It's because I got a coach and I was smarter about it. It was more about participating.
But when you're in the heat of the battle, doesn't something kick in and you go, motherfucker, let's win this goddamn thing? And you go harder, and the pain gets greater, but you love the pain because it's part of the deal. If you want to win, you got to suffer, especially as a triathlete. Did you ever like push Harless, and you see that guy right there, and you got to go?
Okay. So let me. I never had this conscious decision. You got to push hard, because I was just fortunate in that I, back in the day, was a fast runner. And I could run faster than anybody without even trying. I mean, it's just how my body was built, right? And if I had trained hard, I probably would have been really fast. And so so in the amateur game, I don't think I had to. I mean, in order to be competitive, I didn't have to push super hard. So my daughter has a friend who's won some NCAA championships in swimming, has won some national championships, world record holder, a friend of my daughter's in medical school, where she swam for the University of Texas. Great girl, done a couple triathlons. So last year we said, we're going to race each other. And she did it on a borrowed bike, with a borrowed shoe. But of course she killed the swim. But she's she's literally a professional swimmer. And she beat me by 3 minutes. We started at different times because obviously I was in the old man group and she was in the young, fast girl group. But she beat me by 3 minutes. And I went as hard as I could go, and I was stiff, and I had to have 2 massages to get over it. But she crossed the finish line and threw up. She left every ounce on the table. Because she didn't leave an ounce on the table because she was a professional that had been trained for 20 years to go at 100% and maybe 101 to make it happen. And I'm an amateur. And so on that day, I saw what you're talking about, which is that final push. I participate in all of the fun stuff that I get to do as an amateur because it's fun. But I don't think I've ever
suffered.
No, I've suffered because I've done 3 Ironmans. So that's suffering.
That is suffering.
That's really suffering. But
did you learn something from your daughter, watching your daughter throw up at the finish line?
No, it was my daughter's friend.
Your daughter's friend. Did you learn something from her?
Yeah, I learned that she's a pro and I'm an amateur.
But did you think that maybe I can push harder? That there's something left in the bag?
I'm 64 years old. Okay. So I can't do it. I tell you what I learned from it is I wish when I was doing these races avidly in my 30s that I had been professionally coached. That I had paid somebody $300 a month to give me a program, to follow what I was doing, to teach me nutrition, to teach me hydration. And because we just did it from the seat of our pants, right? I mean, and I was with our mutual friend here in town doing a jillion bike rides and long runs on Saturday mornings. And it was total half-ass deal. And then when I got back into it because I like fishing, I took off 10 years. I took off 10 years in triathlons, all in my 40s as my kids were growing up. So I started back in my 50s. And Paul said, you can't do it in your 50s without professional coaching. You can't do it the way we used to do it when we were young and stupid. And with it, I've been to I've qualified for some world championship events. I've been good. I mean, not recently,
really good.
But 5 or 6 years
World
ago,
Championships is pretty good, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was good. I was fast and I was skinny and I felt good. And, so if I take anything from that, it's not, do you need to get to that 100%? It was like, no, man, I should have used this professional coaching when I was 33,
right?
Not when I was 56.
Right. But let me ask you this. When you got into the fishing tournaments, did you get into them just to participate, or did you really want to win?
Totally just to participate.
Really?
So I knew that, I wanted to win, but I knew that Carl Navery had won the Gold Cup twice. And he won it, I believe, in 75. I think he won in 68 and 75. I might have my numbers wrong. But, and we were his guest every year. And he also caught a big world record on plug. I think it was a 167, and it hung at his house at Chica. And so fishing for records and fishing in the tournament was top of mind. And back then, when we were his guest in March or April or May or whenever, people were talking about what are they going to do in the tournament in June. That was the same, right? And so it was top of mind. So I started fishing with Rob, and we went back every year, and I would go in the fall, still go to do a permit tournament or go red. I talked to Rob like 3 days ago about some October dates, just to go fishing, right? I don't have to catch a tarpon. I just want to go fishing. So, I said, do you think it'd be fun to do the Gold Cup? And he's like, well, it's not the same because it's not a kill tournament anymore. And it's always controversy about the straps and the measurements and the cameras and, all the stuff we've all heard about. But it'd still be cool to do. And he said, if you want to do it, he said, I'll do it with you, but you need to talk to Tom Siska. And I got Siska's number from somebody, and the tournament wasn't full. My first year was 22 anglers. So it still wasn't full. There was no wait list. And then I stayed in it for, I think I ran about 15. I think I did 15 straight. I really don't remember. Maybe 15 years straight. And then I had a couple of conflicts like college graduations and stuff like that for my kids where Ryan took my spot and then I came back. So Ryan and I alternated with Rob a couple of years. And then I was done. So I think I was maybe in it 17 years total with a couple of years off.
Did you think about these tournaments during the off season, like during the winter months, thinking, man, I really want to win this thing, and have that passion and that drive? All of a sudden, it became really important in your life. You did great. You won the Holly 3 times. You won the Golden Fly. You're always in it. A number of times second in the Gold Cup.
I think we were
7 times second.
I was I think 7 times second and 3 or 4 times third. So
you were in it forever and ever
for 16 or 17 years. On the podium like 11 times, which that's consistent, right? Mm-hmm. And on my second time. And our second place finishes were always to someone different. It's not like there was one dominant person, right? Lose to you, lose to Delu, lose to Mahaffey, everybody by a release, one fish that you missed on Tuesday, right? It was just always, so I didn't have the confidence that we were going to win, but I had the confidence that we were always going to be there, a fish or 2 away. And towards the end, this might be a little negativity, meaning the end of that run. If we lost a big weight on Wednesday, I'd be like, all right, that's it. I had done it enough. I had done enough to know.
You accepted it.
I had done it. I accepted it, and I'd done enough. I had enough experience to know that if you lose a 140, the odds are very low you're going to find another one. In the last 2 days, you might, but I had enough experience to know that if certain things happen early in the week, it creates a hill that's hard to climb. It doesn't mean it's unclimbable, because twice we caught 4 weights on Friday. It can always be done. I think you've caught 4 weights on Friday. So it can be done, but that's a rare event. Mm-hmm. Right. That,
Tell me the difference about being outside of the inner circle as far as doing well in tournaments And what did it take? Obviously you had Rob, one of the greatest of all time, if not the, as far as being on the podium as many times as he's been there.
Right.
Tell me about the process of all of a sudden understanding the fish to the point that you felt like, I know I can catch that fish. I can catch any fish I see.
I think it's just experience and the number of times that you do it and the number of times you've seen it. And I'm not the world's greatest caster. I mean, I can cast pretty well, but I'm probably not the best. You guys are better. I fished a couple times with Julian. He's awesome, right? So I don't always hit the right spot at the right time. But I tell you what, if there's a fish coming and it hits in the right spot, I know it, and I know we're going to get a bite. You can just see it, right? You can just see it line up, and you can see it happen.
What is that visual?
And it's
a feeling.
It's a feeling, and it's different every time. The wind, the waves, the current, the fish's angle, the speed of the fish, nothing is ever the same. Every single one is different, right? It's not like hitting a golf ball on a tee. It's sitting there still until you hit it. It is in constant motion. And the motion is different than it is every single time. No cast is the same. I would imagine it's like, a batter hitting a baseball. No pitcher throws it exactly the same every time. And the ones that can become the great, great pitchers. But the vast majority of people miss their spot. Mm-hmm. You miss the spot by an inch, you might not hit that baseball. You miss the spot by an inch, you might not get a bite from a tarpon. But when it does hit right, I just feel like after all of these years, I know the bite is coming. And you can just see it and feel it. And I think guides that do it a lot, and probably you guys, know. Now, sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you miss your throw by 18 inches off to the left. Well, guess what? The string bent a little to the left just at the right time, and you got lucky, right? It happens. It's fishing. There's still luck.
There's a lot of movement in fishing.
A lot of movement.
The wind, the boat, the current, the tide, the fish.
Rob used to say, you're not tarpon fishing unless you're on the ocean taking green water over the bow, not spray. Green water with the bilge pump going, because they bite really good, right? And
most people can't cast.
You can't even stand up.
Yes.
Right.
I used to love it when it was blowing like 30.
Yeah.
Because half the field goes away.
They go away, and the fish bite good. Mm-hmm. Bite well, whatever.
Yep.
So,
you know what I see in the world of tarpon fishing? I see how the game has changed with the worm. In the fact that before the worm was thrown, and the way we throw worm flies now, it's you got to hit a certain spot and the speed, and you intercept the fish, and the fish is a reaction bite. He grabs it, right? Remember the old days when we were fishing with feathers and marabou? You're bumping, tweaking, bump, 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 slide, bump, bump, bump. We're force feeding these fish. Now it's a reactionary bite, right? I kind of miss the old days with the romance of trying to dance with the fish.
So I have never, even with worm flies, done the dipsy doodle.
Well, you're still having the same speed with a hand, right? It's still the same cast and getting the fly to move at a certain speed. But whether you do it this way or two hands.
Right. But there's not always the same speed. Sometimes if the fish is coming, it depends on the current, right? If the current's going towards the fish, you don't even hardly move it. It's more of a jiggle, right? Yeah. And so it's not always the same speed. That's what I'm saying. Every single time. So I feel like, if you're just, at the where the current rips in one direction every time, and they come this way, and you throw across them, and you rip it through there with the double hand, works. That's that reaction bite, right? But that's not every shot on the ocean. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're not there in the ripping current. You're there in a slight current, or how the wind plays. And so I think you still, I know what you're talking about, how you've got to make it look like a bait fish and entice the bite, as opposed to sort of, there's a worm, it's worm season, eat it. That's the reaction bite. Yeah. Right.
I also think, go ahead.
But I do think you still have to move it right.
You do have to move it.
Yeah.
I think what you're trying to say is when you're worm fishing on the ocean, there's always a right and wrong way there's always the right way, regardless of, different scenarios, how you might tick it one way and you might sweep it the other way, or, there's a right and wrong way. But on a laid up, dirty water back, there's more feel. And there's not so much of a right and wrong way. You can kind of make and bite doing different things. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that?
I would say that yes, you can make them bite in more than one way, but it's still a fish. They may not want to bite. I mean, it's just, you can do everything right in your opinion that's right, or do it a different way that a different angler thinks is right, and still not get a bite.
Sure.
Right.
But I just think it's so repetitive. And don't get me wrong, I love ocean worm fishing, but it's very repetitive. Mm-hmm. They're going to come from here. Typically, on a typical ocean spot, they're going to come from the left side or the right side if the wind's blowing to shore. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
You know the path they're going to be on. You know the angle. And it's different if you're pulling a basin hunting the fish as opposed to waiting for the fish to come to you.
Right.
So, well, just take a look at the fly box. In the old days, you'd have a fly box and you'd have, 8 toads on this side of the box.
Well, you would.
And 10 toads on this side of the box. Or you would have, a variety of feathered flies and marabou flies, and then you would pick and choose, and you could feed the fish pretty similarly, where you put the fly out there and maybe move it to the point that the fish sees it, and then from there you make that dance. Your next move is depending on what that fish did. Oh, you like that? How about this? Bump, bump. Like that. And you see him, the fish cross his eyes, and here he comes, and you slide it, and you bump, 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 which is so different than worm fishing. And I miss those romantic days, which I feel romantic because we were really kind of, embracing that fish and dancing with the fish and marinating the fly, marinating the situation. With the worm flies and the techniques with worm fishing, you're not marinating a whole lot.
Let me describe this in another way. I kind of didn't know what you guys were getting at, but
now you do.
One of the things I like to do is shoot shotguns. I like clay targets. We shoot birds in South Texas. I like to shoot, and it's fun to shoot clay targets. I went down valley here a couple of Sundays ago with a friend of mine and shot trap and skeet down there in Basalt. So ocean fishing is like skeet shooting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Same.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
Same. Okay. Backcountry fishing is like sporting clays. Doom, 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 doom. Different angles,
Bouncing.
different drops, different things.
Exactly
all different. I like them both. Right? One might be a little more, to use your word, repetitive, but still doesn't mean it's not fun.
No.
And still doesn't mean that you don't get reward from success.
Right.
And the reward from success in skeet shooting is learning the pattern and learning the way it flies and learning the spots and knowing that it's going to work. And that's what I meant about when you make a cast and it's in the right spot, you're like, bingo.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's, just to use an analogy, maybe it's kind of like those two differences. It's not better or worse. It's just different.
Totally.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
What's the favorite part of tarpon fishing for you?
I really think it's changed over time. I'm going to get this little story wrong, but there's the story of the person who gets introduced to fishing, right? And the first time they go, they want to catch a fish. And then they want to catch a lot of fish. And then they want to catch a big fish. And then they want to catch a lot of big fish. And once they've done all that, they just want to go fishing, right? And so I've caught a lot of big fish. I've had big volume days. I've had high quality days. I've had blowout days. And I still want to catch them when I go fishing. But when I get back, if we just had a handful of shots and I didn't hook one, I still had a really good day. Mm-hmm. It's just,
I'm kind of like there too.
I'm kind of there. And it doesn't mean I have, lost the competitive drive. It just means that, I'm not.
You're getting old.
I'm getting old. I am, and I'm not, I have, if I hook a big fish, and I think the big fish fishing downtown in the spring is kind of on a bit of a resurgence, and you got a chance to pull on a really big one, and you hook a big one, and you get him by the side of the boat in 15 or 20 minutes, that is really rewarding. Mm-hmm. And back in the day, it's really fun to put a strap on him and take a photo. And it still would be if I was in the tournament. But still fun to catch them.
Did you get burned out of tournaments? Or did you
I got burned out of doing 3 in a year. I don't know how these guys do it. And these guides that do the ladies as well, they do 4 in a row. I
don't see how these guys.
I don't see how they do it.
Like
and
Rob.
I don't know how they did it when they were young. When I was young and I did a few years, I only did 3 golden flies. Even though it's only 3 days, it's like, oh God. And I did maybe 6 or 7 hollies. Right. And so I had 3 years that I did all 3. And I had maybe 6 or 7 years that I did 2. Mm-hmm. And it's just not my deal. I mean, I didn't mind doing 2. I remember one year I did all 3 of those and I did both bonefish tournaments. And I was just like, oh man.
I did all of them for a long time.
I know. It's hard to do them all.
It was
it has to be the only thing you do.
5 tournaments a year.
Yeah, and it has to be the only thing you do. And,
I was crazy for this stuff.
Yeah.
You know what? I think I was more invested with fishing than I was trying to win the Olympic medal. In the fact that the Olympics time in my life, I didn't have great mentors. I was not smart enough to figure out how to close the gap to the Europeans. I didn't really understand, the taste of victory because I was always trying to do well. I couldn't win against the Europeans at a world level. People say, God, you're a great skier. And I've said this before. No, great ones win the Olympics. I was a good one. I was a good skier. But when you taste victory like you did, it becomes insatiable. It's like you can't get enough of it. And now you have a great mentor like Rob Fordyce, and I had all my guys that I won with. Now the whole game has flipped because once you're in it and just participating, that's fun because you're competing with some of the best in the world, and it's a great environment. But when you start winning those things, it's a completely different thing. You can't get enough of it. And, Nikki, you had a run in it with a few tournaments, Do you miss that?
Not really.
Well,
this is about Carlos.
Huh?
This is about Carlos.
I know, but I'm just interested because we're talking about Carlos and I that have been doing it for a long time. The two, from my first one to the last one was 18 years. And you only did it for such a short period of time. Do you ever wish that you had a chance to dive in and fish with a great guide for a long period of time? And now that you're a dad, that's impossible?
Yeah, of course. Just give me your checkbook because it's not cheap. I mean, it's not cheap and it takes a lot of time, yeah. And I didn't fish it for a short period of time. I fished it for 9 years.
Yeah.
I fished the golden fly for 9 years and I think we got second once. So we didn't do very well, but.
So, without a doubt, the vast majority of my flats fishing days are with Rob. But don't discount days where you learn from other people. Because I've fished with a bunch of them, going all the way back to Billy Knowles and Hal. And I caught my first bonefish with Al Polofsky and used to fish a bunch of days with Joe Rod before he moved down south. And my last Gold Cup, I fished with Peter Lopez, who I think is one of the greatest young guides out there. And they all have a little different take. They all see things in a different way. They all have different ways they talk about stuff. You fish a lot with Doug Kilpatrick. I fished with Doug last year down south. Different way of describing what's going on. And you learn something every day from every different personality. And I think that makes you, particularly when you fish with someone that has a long experience like Billy or maybe Doug down south or something that has seen it all. Mm-hmm. There's a lot to be learned.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be learned from everybody that you just sort of add to your portfolio. And I think that the guides probably are the same. right? I mean,
with anglers.
Those guides have fished with all these different anglers. And in the case of the really, really top guides, a guy like Rob who fishes other tournaments, with Ryan or with Julian or the guys he used to fish the Holly with back in the day, Tebbets and those guys, he takes from those guys. And it might not be their fishing technique, but it might be the way to handle your angler on the front of the boat. What is going to sort of psychologically incentivize them to kind of do the right thing. I think these guys that are in the back of the boat that really sort of mentally manage their angler properly.
They're therapists.
They're really good. And they're like therapists, okay?
Yes.
And it's not all about the motor skills. Some of it is about the head game. And the ones that are really good know how to play the head game. And they know when to push on them, and meaning their angler, and when to kind of ease up a little bit.
Tell me about that nervous space in your head when you're fishing. A fun day versus a tournament day, and how do you control those nerves, or if they were ever an issue?
Well,
did nerves ever affect your casting or how you set the hook?
Setting the hook was always my problem. Being too quick, getting it out of there too fast, or
right here,
or being too firm, really trying to drive that hook hard, and back in the day, we used to fish the old 3407 mustads, right? And sharpen them with a file.
Bend barb down?
Yeah, not always. But reduce. And so they were all long shank. Remember, the short shank was invented, and it was so cool. Right. This short shank hook, right? But boy, you had to stick that thing in there. I mean, you had to hit them. Now with these fancy ultra sharp hooks, man, all you got to do is just hold on tight, let him hook himself.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to do it. That's an exaggeration.
The barb is just a fraction.
Yeah, but I mean, some of these super thin, super strong hooks, if you don't jerk it out of the way and they turn away from you, just kind of hold on, bingo,
you got them.
Right? Particularly in the Holly, where all you got to do is just kind of get them quick.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I remember Carl Navery said to me one time, he had that Southern accent. In the Gold Cup, you need a strong hook. And in a Holly, you need a sticky hook.
Do you have any funny stories about Rob or Billy or, fishing with these guys for 30 plus years? Come on, tell us a funny Rob story. In a tournament or a world record scenario, or just out in the fun.
You know what? One of the things with Rob, because I only fished with him one tournament, was really interesting.
Yeah.
Is that, and you've seen him on all these videos and his TV shows. He's always screaming, hit him, right?
Right.
And I'm going, if he does that with me, I'm going to yank that fly right out of that fish's face.
Yeah.
You know? So my whole time, even before I got into the tournament with Rob, I'm thinking, okay, pretend you can't hear anything. You can't hear anything, especially that hit him stuff. So I remember that was a big war, because I was always trying to wait to feel the fish in my stripping hand before I'd hit him.
Right.
And when he sees that bite and that mouth shuts, that's when he's going. And when I hit him, when that mouth just shuts, it's too early. I got to wait to feel him in that stripping hand.
I know.
And that was my war.
I don't. Apparently Nicky doesn't either. As soon as that mouth opens, you go, whoa!
Well, my dad, he likes to do that too nowadays.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They say you can't yank it out of a fish's face with a double hand strip. Yeah, all you do is just turn your whole body.
My dad proves that wrong. Yeah.
Right. But you asked about when do you get nervous. So nervous, I want to answer that question. Or nerves. Nerves never bothered me until I would miss a few in a row, and then I would start overthinking and wondering, was I too soon? Was I too late? Was I this? And so my fragile psyche, if I missed 4 or 5 fish in a row, would say, holy cow, I'm going to miss some more. Like I told you, yeah. And it's just the sort of negative momentum would keep going, and it's great golfers can hit a bad shot and erase it and go forward and hit the next one. I didn't have that erase function on a bad shot, right? I would it would fester and get worse. And
short memory.
Short memory is really important, and you try to train yourself to do it, but maybe your personality just doesn't do that. So, and I remember the bad days, right? I missed like 7 in a row in the Gold Cup one time. I missed 11 in a row back in the mud by Flamingo on a Tuesday in 2003. I missed 7 in a row down at one day.
Wow, you're mental.
You got tormented.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
You remember that shit.
I remember that stuff. Now I also remember the days we caught 4 weights in one day. So I remember the good days too. Right. And that's what's cool about tournaments is the positives are so great.
You know,
but the negatives are low, right?
When you're playing golf with Nick, and all of a sudden he makes a birdie, and he goes, "Did you feel that?" I go, "Feel what?" The momentum changed.
No, but I was going to say, especially when you have Fordyce in the back. I mean, he does add, especially with my time fishing him, he adds a little more nerves.
Could you want to perform in front of
because he's one of the greats.
I know. But after 30 years, we're pretty good. And we don't just tarpon fish, right? We do the permit tournaments. We've caught bonefish. He's been to the Bahamas with me bone fishing. Every year we fish together offshore in the sailfish tournament. He's just as good a sailfish guy as a tarpon guy.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, and he is always on the boat when we're sailfishing, right? He's like a kite whisperer, or baits under the kite sailfishing.
Right. So
he is a good fisherman across the board. I think he almost was like a pro bass fisherman. I mean, he just fishes well.
Yeah, he does.
You know, and so, and we do all of this varied stuff, and we love tarpon fishing, and we look forward to every spring. And we go, I try to go from February through June, a little bit of every month of the year, catch a little bit of the season, and maybe just a few days here, a few days there, a week in May. But, we just fish all kinds of stuff. And that builds a rapport where if it's tarpon time, you're not all wound up, because I remember when he let the sailfish get off last January, right? So we both messed up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think because you have a big boat, you're having a boat built right now. Tell me about your offshore passion.
I just have a passion for fishing. And when we had the big boat, and someday we'll have another, half the time we used it to transport a skiff to fish other places.
Or in the Bahamas.
So we'd go to the Bahamas. We would camp out for a week in February in the Everglades. And if the fish
camp out means sleeping on the boat.
And we'd stay on the boat. Yeah.
I remember seeing you guys in Ponce.
Yeah. And we'd live on the boat.
How great is that?
Go skiff fishing every day.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'd go, if the tarpon weren't laid up back in the secret spots, then we'd go out front and catch trout on the reefs, or go snook fishing up in Tarpon Bay, or, and we would just stay back there. Or we'd take a trip to the Bahamas and go bone fishing and kind of explore. We might not catch as many, but if you go over there by yourself and you find some and you catch them, or catch a permit. We saw a few one time in the Bahamas.
It means so much more.
Oh, it really fun. Does. We had a blast at the Dry Tortugas one time. We went out there to look for permit, and we couldn't find them. And back on the inside in the bay there, along the beach behind the fort, we found a bunch of baby tarpon. It was about, 10, 15, 20 pounders. And just had a blast.
Yeah.
It's like these little fish had probably never been fished out of a skiff before. You could have caught them from the beach.
So fishing,
it was fun.
Fishing in general is a big part of your life, isn't it?
I've just always have been. And particularly, I like all kinds of fishing, but particularly fly fishing, like you grew up fly fishing here. Our family had a place in Wyoming from the time I was 12. And every night after dinner, I'd go to the river and fly fish. I'd fly fish from, 8 to 9:30 when it got dark every night.
I know. Our youth, in the mountains, like here in Aspen, and you and Cody.
We're so
Wyoming.
Fortunate to get to do that.
Yeah.
And I was there with guests last week and took them down to the river and was catching fish out of holes that I remembered catching them out of that hole 50 years ago.
All right, tell us a Fordyce story. So I remember watching Silver Kings, and it was in the Gold Cup, I believe, or maybe the Golden Fly. You were fighting a big fish, and you're not unraveled and wrapped around your eye guide or something?
So that is pretty amazing because it was on film. So it was Friday of the Gold Cup in 2012. I was fishing in my first Chittenden boat, the one that had the 150 Evinrude on it. And I hooked about an 85-pounder, not a monster, but a nice fish. And I was using an early version of a clear tip line. Those early ones were not very strong. This one was made by Monic, and it was really thick. I don't know if you remember that at the end. And so I guess that's how they got it to float, to be a floating clear tip. And those lines got fragile when it got hot. So I hooked this fish, and I'm fighting it, and it's a weight, and we want it. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of blows up in my hand. And I didn't know what had happened. And I had the Albright knot connecting the fly line to the butt section. The fly line had broken right behind the Albright knot. So the knot itself might have stressed the line. Right. And then it was hot and you're pulling hard.
Right.
And so it goes flipping out the guides. And I felt it kind of go, and then it went. It came tight, and the knot was so clunky that it kind of wrapped itself. It tied itself in a half hitch on the guide at the end of the rod. So now I have a rod, a broken line, and the butt section tied to my tip.
It's a cane pole.
It's a cane pole. And Rob said, what happened? It came off, it stuck, and he accelerated the boat to follow the fish. And for the next 15 minutes, we fought the fish just with a rod. And when it would surge, I would lean forward and he'd move the boat up. And when it would come back, and when it went around, I don't know if that's Silver King's show. You can go watch it on Silver King's.
Yeah, I saw it. It was amazing.
The fish went backwards, and I had to run to the back of the boat and lean backwards, and he's got the boat jammed in reverse. And we almost caught that fish. And to have the whole thing be on film is just
crazy.
It's just crazy that the whole thing's on
film.
The
only way to gain line was to hand line it, possibly get the rod behind you.
No,
hand line.
The leader.
No, it was just the leader. There was no line. From the end,
that's right. From
the end of the
butt section.
From the end of the rod to the fish was 13 feet.
Yeah, right.
And we were in
so the only
6
way,
feet of water.
The only way you were to be able to get him is if you're on the back of the boat and he's really tired, and Rob goes in the front of the boat.
Rob was on the front, and
That's
we could make that. That was the only way.
Oh.
So I'll tell one more Rob story, and it's not really about Rob. It's about another personality from the tournament scene.
Let's hear it.
But we were fishing at the tubes and had a weight fish on and got him to the boat. And Rob goes down to grab him. I've never seen him not get a fish except this one time. 30 years, because he's Rob. He grabs them all. Fish pulls him in. It's 80, 85 pounder. Pulls him in. Starts struggling. He gets his arms around the fish. The fish keeps going. Literally, as it's trying to get away, he's holding its tail underwater. And it gets away, and it breaks off. And Rob comes up, and he's really flustered because, number one, he's in the water on the fallen tide at the tubes, right? Number two, he lost the fish. He was underwater unexpectedly, so he's probably choking. His glasses and his hat are all sideways, and he gets on the side of the boat, and I pull him in the boat. And he's obviously didn't expect that. That whole episode was a shock. And he's pissed that the fish got away. And I was like, that was pretty funny to me. And so to kind of lighten the mood, because we've both been married for 30 years, right? I said, well, someday, Rob, when you're 70 and I'm 80, which is not that far away now, right? When you're 70 and I'm 80, we're going to be fishing at this spot, and we're going to talk about the day the fish pulled you in. And we're all going to laugh, and we're going to say, was that when we were married to our second wife or our third wife? Kind of trying to make a joke. And he goes, no, we're going to say that's back when Rand was still alive.
That's hilarious. Oh, my God.
Because he was running that fast boat everywhere,
Oh, my God.
That is funny.
Yeah, that was a good story.
I think the brotherhood of tournaments is really a special thing.
So that's why I went back this year for the 60th, was just to be with the guys. And about half the guys are new guys. But it's fun to see people at breakfast and say, have a good day. And it's fun to check in the afternoon who caught what and who didn't. And the dinners are fun. And we were talking earlier, people get dressed up now for the awards and wear a jacket, and it's a little bit more of a special event than when you're wearing a T-shirt. And so it's just the fun camaraderie. And Criscola asked me to be on the arbitration committee, which hopefully you never need if there's a rules deal, to be on the arbitration committee. And if there's a question, this year he phoned me, there was some question and it never occurred. I couldn't go this year, but I said, dude, I'll be on that committee as long as you want, as long as I get to go to the dinners. It's just fun to be with everybody.
Yeah.
It's the one time when that core group of dedicated people in the game, not everybody, because you guys aren't there and other people aren't, but everybody's in the room at the same time. It's good.
It's a special group.
It's a good deal.
And what's interesting too is with the podcast, you call a bunch of older guys that were well before our time. And just because we were in the tournaments and they know who we are, we know who they were. The openness and the love will always be there for fellow anglers and fellow guys because you were in the trenches, the same trenches that the guys were in back in the 60s.
Yeah, and I said in the video for the 50th, there's like, what do you not? Someone asked, what do you not like about it? I said, I tell you what I don't like about it. I don't like fishing in the rain. Right? You stand there in the rain all day long for 2 shots, and you get cold and wet in June in Florida. Right? I don't. But then I said, but that's what they did in 1965 and in 1975 and in 85 and in 95. So I shouldn't be complaining in 2015 if I had to stand in the rain, because everybody did it. It's part of it. And those experiences of standing in the rain or racing from a storm, or racing to get back by 5 o'clock when you've caught a great fish, or fishing next to somebody else and watching them catch one when you didn't, or you catching a whole bunch one day right behind somebody else, which really you're like, yeah, they missed them and I got them. All of that is part of that camaraderie and of everybody doing the same thing and having, maybe at different times and in different seasons, everybody has all those experiences, and it's a pretty small group of us that have done that, and that's why everybody's kind of bonded. Even if you don't get along with someone, and they're your rival, or they're a jerk, because not everybody's a nice guy. There's some people that are hard asses. You still got that bond that everybody did the same thing, had the same experiences over the years.
I think the guy that we all gravitate to for the voice of reason is your voice with the rules and the regulations, because you rewrote the rules for the Gold Cup at one point. But during the 60th, I think Criscola, the chairman, brought back Steve Huff to speak. Do you remember what he said?
He kind of talked about how he and Sandy got into it. I don't think there was a lot of philosophy, but he talked about being from down south and coming up to Islamorada and being the first guy from down south to come up here, and maybe not being totally accepted by the community up there,
right,
up in Islamorada, and how they felt the pressure to kind of prove that they were, supposed to be there and that they earned their right. And of course, they won 3 times, and so they certainly proved it. And Steve and as a guide and Sandy as an angler are about as good as it gets, right?
Yeah.
And so
some of the old stories that he had told before.
Some of the old, it was kind of the same stuff. But, the Gold Cup, half the people are new from when I was there. And they're all great anglers. And they've got a long wait list, and so they're picking people that they know are capable. And so some of that was, stories for people who didn't know the story, right?
Tradition is really important. Tradition is really important to understand what came before us. And that was what propels us forward. And I think possibly, you might agree or disagree with me, but one of your most important roles in fishing was when you became the chairman of the board for the IGFA. And I talked to Roy Croniker last night, and he was saying that there was a point in time when Rob Kramer was the president. He was moving on to run, Wild Oceans, and you and Roy Croniker, who's now the chairman of the board, got together, and I said, that was a meeting that changed the direction of the IGFA. He said, you guys planted the seeds to make it what it became today, which is making the IGFA a full-fledged organization, like a business, versus an old boys fishing club.
That's exactly right.
Tell me a little bit about what the IGFA was before you came on board and the direction you guys took and how you actually changed the IGFA. And let me go back real quickly here, because a lot of people might not know what the IGFA is. The IGFA is the International Game Fish Association, which was started in 1939 by a guy by the name of Michael Lerner. And back in the day, he had this vision to create an organization that would form a base of rules by which the world angling community, fly fishing and traditional conventional guys, could fish under the same base, and also to conservation in the science of the fishery. And then for that many years, it was kind of run with that kind of a platform, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah, and I can expand on that a little. So, it was founded in the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And it before the rules, it was about fisheries and fisheries science. The second employee, was a biologist. And they brought themselves together, and then they went out and did, and this is a little bit of a simplification, but they did sort of exploratory fishing. The American Museum of Natural Science had African trophies that Theodore Roosevelt shot, and people could come look at those things because they'll never get to go to Africa. So they go somewhere in the ocean and they catch a giant marlin and they put it on the wall in the museum, because a lot of people in New York are never going to get to see it unless it's on the wall in the museum. Now, this is kind of a gross simplification, and it's my opinion. But all these guys are running around collecting these scientific specimens, and they started comparing, mine's bigger than yours. Well, you caught it on 130, and I caught mine on 50, so that's better. And so from that, people are like, okay, if we're going to start comparing who caught what, we need to standardize the rules. And there were rules from the Avalon Tuna Club, and there were rules from the British Tuna Club, and they sort of pulled them together, and they created a set of angling rules which people still use today. And then they started calculating who caught what under what set of rules, what line class, fly fishing rules were originally kept by Field and Stream. Mm-hmm. And I think Mark Sosin had a lot to bring those over to the IGFA maybe in the 60s.
That was the saltwater fly rodders of America in the Northeast.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Right. And so it was a couple of different ways. And so finally by the 70s, it was kind of all in one place. But the reason he called it kind of a fishing club is that it had these roots with people that sort of were exploratory fishermen, catching different species in different waters, then standardizing the techniques under which they caught them, and keeping records of which ones were the biggest.
Yep.
Right. And so that's a simplification, as I said. But the IGFA in the 70s started on this path where they said, we kind of need to be member driven, like Ducks Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, CCA, which had started in Texas under Walter Fondren to save the redfish. And those were member-driven, right? And they had chapters in each city or in each fishery. And people volunteered at a chapter level and then the next level, and then there was kind of a governance group. Well, the IGFA kind of had the governance group, but it didn't really have this reach. And I remember during my time there hearing that from one of our trustees from South America that building membership was hard in South America because people had the IGFA on this pedestal, and they were like, well, I'm not a good enough angler to be a member of the IGFA. So they had to, it wasn't any more about being a good enough angler. It was about wanting to protect and preserve and promote sport fishing. The International Game Fish Association. It's not the International Food Fish Association, even though we might keep a salmon and eat it. It's the game fish. It's fish that you pursue for sport, right? Which is another reason why rules were important, because every sport has a governing set of rules, right? Mm-hmm. It's game fish. So this trend started, and it continued under Rob Kramer. And what Rob Kramer and his director of conservation, Jason Schratweiser, who's now our president, they were from fisheries, right? They were conservation guys. And they started, in addition to building the membership grassroots, started building a push into conservation. So we're not just about keeping records, because frankly, hanging a big dead fish on the wall is not exactly consistent with conservation, right? And particularly in today's world where, things can go viral really quick, killing fish for sport, not exactly politically correct. People didn't worry about that back in the day. That's the reason the tarpon tournaments aren't kill tournaments anymore. So they still collect records, but it has a very strong scientific push now, because every now and then one of the species is taken for scientific reasons. But it's really done under this whole context of conservation. The IGFA has partnered with groups that you would consider environmental groups that might be anti-fishing. But the partnership is, we're not against fishing. We just don't want you to fish in the spawning area during spawning time. And so we'll agree, yeah, let's get out of there. Let's make sure the resource is healthy, and let's make sure the fishery is healthy. Let's not stop all fishing. Yeah. Let's stop it when it matters to stop it. Right. Mm-hmm. That's why we don't shoot elk in the spring when they're having babies, right? So it's smart conservation moves, but it's fisheries, it's conservation. It's still all kinds of angler recognition, whether it's catching a slam, catching a world record. World records are pretty hard to do now, right? Everybody's caught them all. But, whether it's a record or whether it's a slam or whether it's a trophy club like catching a 10-pound bass or something, we try to recognize great success in angling. We also try to recognize every year with our conservation awards great success in doing things for fisheries and for access to fishing. And so we have partner groups from everybody. But against all of that, as we build the membership base, coming full circle to what Roy said, I remember when Roy and Rob and I got together, he came to our family place in Wyoming. And it was before Rob said he was leaving, but we basically said, we got to run this thing like a business. Right. And we've got to be smart about how we fund it. We got to be smart about where we spend our money to do the right things, not only for the fisheries, but also the right things to sort of sustain the organization. And at that time, we said to ourselves, this is great to have an academic and a scientific organization, but we need some nuts and bolts numbers people in here too, and marry the two together. And so Roy's exactly right that on the heels of this trying to build membership through the 70s, 80s, 90s, then all of a sudden we've transitioned it. And when Rob left, we had a business guy in there for a while that set up some processes, Neil Horton, processes and businesses and systems that are the way you run a business. He had come from the corporate world. And it's a little inconsistent with how nonprofits typically run. And so what makes it successful is if you have some of both. You hang on to the tradition. You hang on to the past. You celebrate the past. You celebrate the science that it started with in 1939. And you make sure that you continue that today in fresh and salt waters, and then marry that with, budgets and processes and planning what you're going to do for the year in a strategic way, and having a 3-year strategic plan. And what are we going to do next? And and they've got all that. Mm-hmm. And so it's very professionally run and holds on to the tradition, but is smart and businesslike on the other side. Is that helpful?
You definitely went to Harvard.
Well, we're inducting Kevin Von Dam into the Hall of Fame September 7th. And one of the statements I'm going to make is, Kevin, even though you might be in 100 fishing Hall of Fames, now you're being inducted into the biggest one of all, the most important Hall of Fame of all. With what we've done, how many species, how many records. We are all fish, all water, all oceans. And
we're not just fishermen.
We're not just,
there's conservationists.
Yes, absolutely.
There's tackle innovators.
Yep.
There's all of these people that have done things to improve the sport of game fishing, and some of them don't even fish.
That's right.
Right.
And we're even inducting somebody this year from 1885, I think he's from.
Because they mattered.
Yeah, they matter.
I forget the name, but in the first class was the guy that invented fly fishing. And his leader was a horsehair. Literally a horsehair. The breaking strength of a horsehair on the end in England is like 3 pounds.
I know.
And if you're fishing for big ones, you use 2 hairs and twist them.
So
The guy's like 1600 or something. He's in the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
But he invented fly fishing.
Right.
So he's in there.
Take a look at fishing as a whole. Go to the IGFA on the internet. Become a member. My gosh,
Absolutely.
Just join. Become a member. Take a look at what's out there. You can learn so much in all aspects of fishing.
And if you're ever in Springfield, Missouri, our Hall of Fame and museum is now in the big Wonders of Wildlife Museum that Johnny Morris has in Missouri.
It's mind-boggling.
And it's totally worth the trip. It takes a day to get through it.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Carlos, you've been a good friend for a long time. You've done so many things. And when I once knew you as a fisherman, I didn't realize how cool you are and all these things you do. And my God, we've become great friends, through the IGFA and the tournaments, and now, the things we do on the side, and I just want to say thank you for being who you are and all these great things that you've done, and being a great friend of Nikki's and mine.
Well, I've enjoyed getting to know you guys. We met in my first Gold Cup in 2002, so it's been 22 years. And it's been a good run.
Yeah, it has.
It's been a good run. And now both of us are looking at the rearview mirror at the tournaments. And you talk about them a lot because they're important and special to both of us, and it's an important part of the history that you're building with these podcasts. Mm-hmm. And I think it's good that you guys are taking the time and effort to record all this. And
it's important to remember, yes.
Because it's important that people remember kind of from where we came. And we were both very emotionally involved in fishing and in fisheries, and tried to do the right thing. And you're now an IGFA trustee as well, and you're basically the spokesperson for IGFA and MC all the events. And you said exactly the right thing on everybody that listens to this ought to be a member. And but it's good that we connect.
We connect the dots.
We connect the dots, and we put all back together. And a part of it, becoming friends with you guys, has been a good part of it for me as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Carlos. Yeah, appreciate you sharing your story. You got a fascinating one.
Yeah, it's fun.
Thanks so much.
All right, buddy.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's go play golf.
When I saw his best story, when I saw it's just a